U.S. Marines entered an abandoned bunker on Iwo Jima. What they found inside was unthinkable. February 19th, 1945. The black volcanic sands of Iwo Jima. As U.S. Marines stormed the beaches of this 8-square-mile island, they had no idea what awaited them beneath their feet. This wasn't just another Pacific Island battle. This was about to become the bloodiest engagement in Marine Corps history. But the real horror wasn't on the surface. It was underground. Miles and miles of it. A subterranean nightmare that would haunt those who entered for the rest of their lives. Today we're going to take you inside one of these abandoned bunkers. What the Marines discovered there would change everything they thought they knew about warfare and about the enemy they were fighting. This is the untold story of Iwo Jima's underground fortress. Before we can understand what the Marines found, we need to understand why Iwo Jima mattered. Picture an island just 750 miles from mainland Japan. Too close for comfort, too strategic to ignore. For the Japanese, losing Iwo Jima meant the war would literally come to their doorstep. For the Americans, capturing it meant their B-29 bombers could reach Tokyo with fighter escorts and have an emergency landing strip for damaged aircraft. But there was something else, something the Americans didn't fully understand until it was too late. In May 1944, a man arrived on Iwo Jima who would change everything. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, a descendant of samurai warriors with 30 years of military experience. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo himself told Kuribayashi, "Only you, among all the generals, are qualified and capable of holding this post. The eyes of the entire nation are focused on the defense of Iwo Jima." Kuribayashi knew he couldn't win, but he could make the Americans pay a price they'd never forget. What Kuribayashi did next was unprecedented. He abandoned traditional Japanese military doctrine. Instead of defending the beaches, he ordered his men to dig and dig, and dig some more. For 9 months, 25% of the entire garrison, over 5,000 men, did nothing but tunnel into the volcanic rock. They worked in temperatures between 86 and 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The sulfur fumes were so toxic they had to wear gas masks, but they kept digging. The plan was ambitious: create an underground network spanning 27 kilometers, nearly 17 miles, that would connect every major defensive position on the island. By the time the Marines landed, they had completed 18 kilometers of this subterranean maze, over 1,500 bunkers, some 75 feet deep into the mountainside command centers, barracks, storage facilities, artillery positions, all connected by tunnels with multiple entrances and exits. Some chambers could hold 300 to 400 men. Mount Suribachi alone contained thousands of yards of tunnels, honeycombed into its volcanic slopes like a termite mound. The Americans had no idea Private Jim Naughton of the 3rd Battalion, 28th Marines, remembered the approach to Iwo Jima clearly. He said, "Nobody talked. God only knew what was ahead of us." The Marines hit the beaches in waves, almost 80,000 men, the largest Marine operation of the Pacific War. They expected fierce resistance at the waterline. They expected machine gun fire artillery, the standard Japanese beach defense. Instead, silence. The first obstacle wasn't bullets. It was the island itself. One Marine described running across the black volcanic sand as trying to run in loose coffee grounds. Every step forward meant sliding 2 steps back. Vehicles became stuck. Equipment bogged down. The Marines struggled to even climb the 15-foot terrace that separated the beach from the interior. And then, exactly 30 minutes after the first wave landed, all hell broke loose. The Japanese had waited, hidden in their bunkers, in their tunnels, watching through concealed observation posts as the beaches filled with American troops and equipment. When General Kuribayashi gave the order, every part of Iwo Jima became subject to defensive fire artillery, mortars, machine guns, all carefully pre-sighted, all perfectly coordinated. The Marines were trapped, pinned down on an open beach with nowhere to hide. By the end of that first day, the assault elements had lost nearly 600 killed and 1,800 wounded, and they'd barely gained a toehold on the island. But here's what made it worse. The Marines would clear out a bunker with grenades and flamethrowers, then move forward, mission accomplished. Right? Wrong. Minutes later, fire would erupt from that same bunker. The Japanese were using the tunnel network to reoccupy positions the Marines thought were secure. They could attack from behind, disappear underground, and emerge somewhere completely different. Private First Class Donald Hatch later wrote, "It was like fighting a ghost. You'd kill them in one place, and they'd come back to life in another." The Americans were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. As the Marines pushed inland, they began to understand the true scope of what they were facing. This wasn't a defensive position. It was an underground city. Sergeant Michael Strank of Easy Company, 28th Marines, was among the first to enter one of the larger tunnel complexes near Mount Suribachi. What he radioed back stunned his commanders. The entrance was carefully concealed, camouflaged with volcanic rock and debris. Inside, a stairway descended into darkness, 20 feet, 30 feet, deeper. The heat was intense. The sulfur fumes burned their lungs even with gas masks. But what they found inside was unthinkable. The tunnels were reinforced with concrete and steel. Some passages were wide enough to drive a truck through. Others were narrow, claustrophobic death traps where a single defender could hold off dozens of attackers. The Marines found fully stocked ammunition depots, medical facilities, communication centers, living quarters with bunks and personal belongings, kitchens with cooking equipment, thousands of gallons of stored water, artillery pieces mounted on rails that could be rolled to different firing positions. But that's not all they found. In one cave at the base of Hill 362A, Marines discovered something that humanized the enemy in a way that warfare rarely does. Blue and white porcelain mess tins, teacups, sake bottles with Japanese characters still visible, letters from home, photographs of families, children's drawings tucked into breast pockets. One Marine found a diary. The last entry, dated February 18th, one day before the invasion, simply read, "Tomorrow they come, I am ready to die for the Emperor, but I wish I could see my daughter one more time." But there were darker discoveries, too. Bodies. Lots of them. Some Japanese soldiers had chosen seppuku, ritual suicide, rather than face defeat. Others had died from starvation and dehydration when their tunnel sections were sealed off by American demolitions. In the deeper sections, where ventilation was poor, entire chambers were filled with the dead. Some still at their posts. Still gripping their weapons, the smell was indescribable. A mixture of decay, sulfur, and death that clung to everything. Marines who entered these sections said they could never wash it off. Not really. It stayed with them. The tunnel network presented an almost impossible tactical problem. Traditional infantry tactics didn't work. You couldn't assault what you couldn't see. You couldn't flank an enemy that could appear anywhere. The Marines developed new tactics on the fly. First, they tried pumping gasoline into the tunnels and igniting it. Lieutenant Joseph Pappy Lenoir of the Ammunition and Pioneer Platoon literally pumped hundreds of gallons of fuel into cave entrances and set it ablaze. The resulting explosions were enhanced by stored Japanese ammunition. In one instance, 54 enemy troops somehow survived and surrendered. Amazed they were still alive. Second, they used flamethrowers. Teams of Marines with flamethrowers became the most valuable and most vulnerable troops on the island. They had the highest casualty rate of any unit, but they were the only effective way to clear the fortified positions. Third, they sealed caves. Using demolitions and bulldozers, they literally buried the Japanese alive in their own fortress. But nothing prepared the Marines for the psychological warfare. At night, Japanese soldiers would emerge from hidden entrances. They'd infiltrate American lines, kidnap soldiers, torture them where their screams could be heard by their comrades. Marines started sleeping in shifts, keeping weapons loaded at all times, trusting no one. Even the ground itself became the enemy because you never knew what was beneath your feet. Corporal James Day later recalled, "You couldn't let your guard down for a second. We'd be sitting there eating rations and suddenly a grenade would roll out of a spider hole we didn't even know was there. The island was trying to kill us from every direction." In late March, as the battle entered its final phase, a patrol from the 147th Infantry Regiment discovered what they believed was General Kuribayashi's underground headquarters in the northern part of the island. The entrance was found 500 meters northeast of Kita village. It descended 20 meters, about 65 feet, into the volcanic rock. Inside was something that defied imagination. The complex consisted of multiple caves connected by 150 meters of tunnels. 3 small concrete enclosed chambers served as war rooms. Maps still hung on the walls. Communication equipment sat on desks. Teacups were still half full. But the general himself was nowhere to be found. His body was never recovered, never identified. He had simply vanished into the island he'd defended with such determination. Even after Iwo Jima was declared secure on March 26, 1945, the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The 147th Infantry Regiment was assigned to garrison duty. Intelligence estimated there were maybe 100 to 300 Japanese soldiers still hiding underground. The actual number? Closer to 3,000. For 3 more months, American troops hunted Japanese holdouts in the tunnel network. It became known as cave hunting. Every day brought deadly encounters, ambushes, firefights in pitch-black tunnels, desperate last stands. On April 4th, a Japanese task force of approximately 200 men emerged from underground near East Boat Basin. They attacked an American command post, and the firefight lasted all night. From March 21st to June 30th, the 147th Regiment killed 1,602 Japanese soldiers and captured 867 American losses, 15 dead and 144 wounded. But even that wasn't the end. 2 Japanese soldiers, machine gunners Matsudo Linsoki and Yamakage Kufuku, remained hidden in the tunnels for nearly 4 years. They finally surrendered on January 6, 1949. Think about that. The war had ended in August 1945. The entire world had moved on, and these 2 men were still fighting a battle that had ended years before. When they emerged, skeletal and weak, they asked if Japan had won the war. When told they had surrendered, they didn't believe it at first. They thought it was an American trick. Today, many of these tunnels can still be explored. Visitors to Iwo Jima, now officially called Iwo To, report finding artifacts that have remained untouched for decades: rusty weapons, helmets, personal belongings exactly where they were dropped in 1945. Modern visitors from Japan leave bottles of water and sake at tunnel entrances as offerings to the fallen, giving them the water they lacked during the battle. The tunnels create a maze under the surface of the island. Many sections remain unexplored due to the danger of cave-ins and unexploded ordnance still littering the passages. The final numbers tell a sobering story. The Battle of Iwo Jima lasted 36 days, almost 7,000 Americans killed, nearly 20,000 wounded. It remains the only Pacific War battle where American casualties exceeded Japanese casualties. Of the 21,000 Japanese defenders, only about 1,000 survived. Most chose death over surrender. About 12,000 Japanese remains are still missing, buried somewhere in the volcanic ash or sealed in collapsed tunnel sections. It became the most highly decorated single engagement in U.S. Marine Corps history. 27 Medals of Honor were awarded, 22 to Marines and 5 to Navy sailors. The question haunts historians to this day. Was Iwo Jima worth the cost? The island did serve its purpose. In the months following the battle, more than 2,200 American B-29 bombers made emergency landings on Iwo Jima's airfields, saving the lives of over 24,000 airmen. Another 4,200 aircraft were flown from the island against Japan. Air-sea rescue teams operated from Iwo Jima, saving countless pilots who ditched in the Pacific. But some argue the atomic bomb made the planned invasion of Japan unnecessary, meaning Iwo Jima's strategic value was negated before it could truly matter. What the Marines learned on Iwo Jima shaped American military doctrine for decades. The tactics developed for fighting an entrenched enemy in fortified positions influenced operations in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. The understanding that warfare had evolved beyond traditional surface battles, that the enemy could literally be beneath your feet, changed how the military approached every subsequent conflict. On February 23rd, 4 days into the battle, 6 Marines raised the American flag atop Mount Suribachi. Joe Rosenthal's photograph of that moment became the most reproduced photograph of all time. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It became the model for the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington, Virginia. But 3 of the 6 men in that photograph were killed before the battle ended. They never made it off the island. The photograph captured a moment of triumph, but beneath that mountain the fighting was far from over. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, who commanded the Pacific Fleet, had this to say about Iwo Jima. Among those who served on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. That statement is engraved on the Marine Corps War Memorial. But there's another truth that should be remembered. The Japanese defenders of Iwo Jima showed equal courage, fighting for a cause they believed in, defending ground they'd been ordered to hold, dying for an emperor and a country that would ultimately surrender just months later. The bunkers and tunnels of Iwo Jima stand as monuments to the brutality of war, to the lengths human beings will go to when ordered, to the courage of men on both sides who fought in the darkness, far from home, for causes greater than themselves. Today, Iwo Jima is home to a Japanese naval air base with about 400 personnel. The island's residents before the war, all evacuated or drafted, never returned. It remains largely uninhabited except for military personnel. The beaches are still black. Mount Suribachi still towers over the landing zones, and beneath it all those tunnels remain. Silent, dark, waiting. What the Marines found when they entered those abandoned bunkers wasn't just weapons and supplies. It wasn't just bodies and personal belongings. They found proof that war transforms men into something else, something desperate, something willing to live like moles in darkness and heat and sulfur fumes for months, something willing to die rather than surrender. They found the lengths to which human beings will go when they believe they're fighting for something that matters, and perhaps most unthinkable of all, they found the mirror image of themselves, enemy soldiers who were just as brave, just as determined, just as far from home. The tunnels of Iwo Jima aren't just a military curiosity, they're a reminder of what humans are capable of, for better and for worse. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, please like, subscribe, and share. Let us know in the comments what other untold stories from World War II you'd like us to cover. Until next time, remember history. All of it, not just the glory, so we never repeat the worst parts.